Simon Napier-Bell, very warm welcome to the programme. You've seen firsthand what drugs do to people, what drugs do to people in the public eye, pop singers. Why, when you've seen the misery that they cause and the destruction, why legalise them?
I think, in principle, the enormous intake of drugs by everybody is largely due to their being illegal. The fact that they're pushed by people who are basically criminals and only in it for profit. And for everything you see bad about drugs, there are also plenty of good which comes from drugs.
What good comes from drugs?
Oh, creativity, relaxation of inhibition.
Measure that against the 18,000 kids who died from drugs in the States last year. Bit of relaxation, a bit of creativity.
No, but I think all I've been saying, I don't take drugs, so this is not my battle to fight, but I look at it...
No, but you've chosen it. You've chosen to speak out on it.
I look at it and I see that, if anything, it's the drug pushes and the inability to control them which causes the excessive use of drugs. Or it's one of the causes of the excessive use of drugs.
3,000...
Besides which, and this is a really strong point, is that if drugs are legalised, the drugs which people take now wouldn't be the drugs people take. I mean, when Prohibition was enforced, people drank...
Why? You don't know that. I mean, the government's assumption is that in the case of strongly addictive drugs, you legalise those and consumption would rise enormously.
I don't think it would rise. The people who already take them will probably go on being hooked on them, but the fact is if drugs are legalised, drug companies will make drugs which are recreational drugs, which they don't do now. When Prohibition was ended, people didn't rush around trying to buy wood alcohol. They drank better spirits and better...
Oh, and they're killing themselves on better spirits now, aren't they? Hand over fist.
That I wouldn't disagree with, but then you have to... Are we going to ban alcohol too?
No, but so far, the number of people who die is a fraction from drugs, is a fraction of those who die from tobacco and alcohol. You want to bring it up to those levels?
No, I don't want to bring it up at all. And anyway, all I'm saying is that the illegality is it's an impossible situation at the moment. It's not going to be controlled, it's not changed. All the experience the last 20, 30, 40 years of drugs shows that making it illegal doesn't control it. Therefore, something else has to be looked at.
Huge cost to the health service if you legalise drugs.
Oh, both ways around. I think that the moral dilemma the government has, if you legalise drugs, then the government will be making money out of drugs, which is something they'll never get past. If you decriminalise them, all you do is you help the drug pusher.
You say decriminalise. What about the strong correlation between crime and drug use?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you do decriminalise drug use, if you say, all right, well, to have soft drugs and possess them and take them is not a criminal offence, as Belgium has just done.
No, I'm talking about those who use drugs and then commit crimes, rather than actually committing a crime by using it.
The majority of drug users commit crimes. They commit crimes to buy drugs at an enormously inflated price that make it them being illegal causes to happen.
But when you have a correlation between those who are taking hard drugs and being shown as a result of
90% of the crimes
to be committing a huge number of crimes.
Yes, but they're committing the crimes to get the money to buy the drugs.
And then commit crimes when they're under the influence of those drugs.
Principally, they're committing crimes to get the drugs. I mean, 35 years ago, heroin could be obtained from National Health.
The figures don't really support your view. I mean, figures for England and Wales out of people arrested who gave samples. This was in 1999. The group with the costliest drug habits was responsible for more than 50% of all offences in the group that was monitored.
No, it's possible, and it's possible also if you check the alcohol figures, it's exactly the same, but there's no one going around suggesting that alcohol should be criminalised. And I suspect eventually we have to come to terms with the fact
there are a few, those who deal with the sort of health aspects. And
well, not saying
120,000 people in this country a year who die.
Not saying it should be criminalised. They say just better education, and that's really what's needed is drug education.
The point is to keep kids off it.
Absolutely, totally. And what we're talking about is, anyway, if it's legalised, it's not legalising it for kids. You're going to have the same age barrier for drugs as alcohol.
This letter from a parent in the States who lost a 15-year-old through cocaine, it says, exacerbating this problem are those who use and promote drug use as a personal right, regardless of how they couch their rhetoric. These so-called drug policy experts want to be allowed to use whatever drugs they want, disregarding the cost that drug use imposes on society. It is a huge cost, isn't it?
Well, I think the cost of chasing after the criminal element is also equally great. And in America, something I thought would never happen, they are actually beginning to discuss the possibility of legalising, or what would happen if we legalised. Here we have discussed it previously. And
legalising all drugs?
Not making it a criminal offence to take drugs.
That's been discussed for a long time, hasn't it?
Yes.
But so far society is coming out against it.
I think it will continue to come against it, but still my opinion is that it has to be legalised. I don't see any way of really controlling it and educating people why it's illegal.
Isn't the danger of you coming out and promoting this view with your standpoint, your experience in the music industry, that you help glamorise this?
I don't glamorise. I don't take any drugs. I took one out in 1966. I think drugs I don't approve of drugs or like them in a social way.
But by you saying it should be legalized, and by people in the music industry saying they take drugs on a regular basis, makes it seem cool to kids, doesn't it?
It may do, but if it's decriminalised, at least whatever kids take those things aren't being wound. If you once say to a kid...
You're like a giant advert on a billboard, aren't you? You know, it's like but you don't carry a health warning, unlike those cigarette ads.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think that by decriminalising it and teaching people to respect what a drug can do and be fearful of what a drug can do is very much better than simply saying, you're a criminal, we can't talk about it, we're not going to tell you about it. It's not the right way to go about it.
Why did you not take drugs when you saw... Because you saw what was happening to people around you?
No, I just didn't fancy them. I mean, I discovered that alcohol was a pleasant way to relax at the end of the day when I was in my 20s, and I think that's been enough for me ever since.
You said your best times, or the funniest times, have been when you're drunk.
Many, yes.
Best times of your life when you're drunk?
I think, in conjunction with other things, frequently, a drink is the best part of a good day. At the end of the day, it brings out great conversation.
Isn't that a bit sad?
Possibly.
But pleasure has to come out of a bottle.
I might be a very sad person, but are you going to tell me you haven't sat and had wonderful convivial conversations over a bottle of wine?
You've talked about in your book, Black Vinyl, White Powder, talks about the integral relationship between the pop music industry and drugs. You've suggested that your association as manager and writer, in some senses, was pretty unedifying. You said you felt like someone who's made a good living cleaning toilets when you've managed a pop band. Was it that bad?
Oh, it has been. That was probably in a dire moment after managing a particularly bad pop band. But sometimes, yes. I mean, sometimes you do feel you're doing little more than that. In fact, probably less useful.
Lavatory attendant?
At moments, it's not much better than that, and other moments, it seems to be much better. I mean, in the moments when you realise that pop is having a profound effect on youth culture or changing the way people think or behave, and to some degree, pop has done that many times over, even today, you feel good about it. And other times, you think, really, what a complete waste of time. Or what did I go to school and get an education for, just to be helping kids with an ego go out and be pop singers? You
talked about some of the pop singers who were on cocaine. You said it was a hopeless drug. It's hopeless if you're on it and hopeless if you're not.
Seems to be, yes.
How do you manage someone, how did you manage someone who has a drug habit like that?
Well, cocaine, the best thing is just to say goodbye. People who take cocaine are so completely out of the normal behaviour the normal behaviour which is required to turn up and do gigs and play. They're impossible when they're on cocaine, and the people who rely on cocaine are almost as impossible when they're not taking it. They feel the need of it so greatly. It's really the most damaging drug. From my point of view as a manager, it's the one drug I really can't cope with people who are taking cocaine.
Worst example?
Just manic behaviour, complete irresponsibility, complete lack of caring for their career or anything else at the time when they're taking it, and perhaps when they're not taking it, a come down which comes to the same thing.
Trashing property? I mean, you talk quite a bit about...
Well, yes, I mean, that's gone on for years in the music business, and that seems to be a sort of part of the mythology which people, certainly in the rock days, felt was required. Whether or not they took cocaine to inspire them to do it or not, I don't know.
Do you think to any extent that pop singers, pop artists learned lessons from what happened to Keith Moon, Elvis Presley, Jimi Hendrix?
No, I think most pop stars... we have to separate these things, but if we're talking about rock stars or people who aspired still to rock music and being rock stars in the classic sense, I think many of them really think that's the right way to behave, and they want to behave that way, and they see their life in its proper perspective if they were doing that. I mean, that's not that unusual. Great artists often have a very self-destructive streak and feel it's an essential part of their art to behave that way.
But by the time John Lennon was actually killed, I think you suggested somewhere that was a wake-up call to some people. They realised that this kind of lifestyle had to stop.
I think more of what I said, it's the end of an era. I mean, rock and roll had gone on through the 70s with its greater successes. And a huge number of the artists had gone on to heroin and were very self-destructive, which might have been a necessary part of that particular art. But when John Lennon died, it seemed to be the moment when rock and roll faded away and a whole new musical era started, which was just as self-destructive drug-wise.
There have been plenty of times when you have walked away. You talked about people on cocaine, said the best thing to walk away. You walked away from being Mark Bolan's manager. Why?
Well, it wasn't so much walking away as we drifted away. He'd come to me, and I'd seen him an enormous talent. I'd put him in a group called John's Children, who were an electrified rock group. It had gone very, very well for a while. Eventually, he wanted to leave them, and when he left them, he decided he'd form his own band. He put in the first ones in the Melody Maker, interviewed people at 4 in the afternoon who went to play a gig together at 7 in the evening without having rehearsed. It was the sort of disaster you'd expect, but Mark lived this dream that the right people in the right moment, the right feeling, everything would go right, and somehow they would call out the name of a song and they'd all be able to play it even if they didn't know the chords.
What was it, confidence? Overconfidence?
Enormous confidence, mad self-confidence. He was the most madly self-confident person there ever was. And when he realised this was just a crazy dream, and because it was a total disaster, he just went into a shower. He decided that was it. He would never, ever put himself in that position again. So he sat on a rug with an acoustic guitar, and he made the music. Somebody else banged on congas. And as he began to build up a name for doing something interesting like that, it became more and more apparent that his market was one which was so non-commercial that to have a manager, a traditional manager, was damaging to him. You know, he was playing to hippies and universities, and it seemed the wrong thing for a manager to be phoning up and negotiating a fee.
So you and he had a fundamental difference about what a manager was supposed to do. I mean,
Yeah,
I
so
remember
what
he said something like, the whole point of having a manager is to have a nice pad to drop into, somewhere I can listen to music, smoke a few joints, drop some acid.
Well, that was his idea.
Wasn't that the idea of a lot of people at that time?
I think a lot of people, and I think a lot of managers might have felt that the artist pad was equally for doing the same thing, but I was a different type of manager. I saw it as a business. If it wasn't a business, if I wasn't making money, I didn't want to do it. I've never seen managing artists as something which I really want to do. You know, it's just, it's a job I fell into. I'm good at it. I choose to do it well. I like doing it well. And if somebody doesn't really need a manager in the real sense of the word, it's pointless me trying to be his manager.
You've had some notable successes, but you've passed up some notable successes as well. Julio Iglesias?
Well, it wasn't so much passing him up. I had this idea in the 70s that sooner or later a Spanish singer would hit the nerve of the English market with all these tourists going there every year. So I went there deliberately to find the Spanish singer who I'd take on. There were 3 top singers at the very top at that time. One was Julio Iglesias, one was Camilo Sesto, who became very, very big too, and one was a guy called Junior. And at the time he looked the better bet. He spoke perfect English. He was #1 when I went there. So I said no to Julio and took on Junior. 7 years later, my idea was right. A Spanish singer did make it big in the English market, and it was Julio.
But Junior had a particular mean streak to him, didn't
he was wonderful. He was the meanest person I ever met. He had an ability to drive you mad. And the funny thing is that, like so many artists, he had this enormous charm. He could drive you to the point where you just could not talk to him for his meanness. And then 2 days later, having not seen him, you'd give him a big hug. There was one time he came to England, and he drove me mad for a whole week. He got more and more jittery throughout the week. I thought probably because nobody knew him here and he was used to being a star. So when he left, I hired a Rolls-Royce to drive him to the airport. Paid for it myself, went to the hotel, put him in. He looked terrified when he saw it because he thought it might cost him some money. I said, no, this is from me, a gift, a Rolls-Royce to the airport on me. And when we got to the airport, he said, have you got 90 pence? I said, what for? He said, oh, I want to buy Playboy and I don't want to break into a pound.
There was a problem with an ice cream in Brazil as well, wasn't there?
In Mexico.
Which actually has to be the pettiest story ever in the music industry.
We were in Mexico, and every day for a week, everywhere we went, there was something to pay, coffee to buy, a drink. He said, oh, I haven't changed my money yet. Have you got any money? And I paid everything day after day. Petty, it didn't matter. It wasn't money, it was the principle. Finally, it got to the Sunday afternoon, and we had to pass 2 hours before a TV show, and we went for a walk in the market. And he suddenly said, oh, I'd want an ice cream. And I said, oh, and I'd copied him completely. I said, I haven't got my money with me. And he said, well, nor have I. He said, call someone from the record company and tell them to come and buy an ice cream for us.
Literally?
Yes, and I couldn't put any money in the box, so I told him I hadn't got any. So I had to go to the phone and make a reverse charge call to the home of the head of the record company. And I said, Junior wants an ice cream. And we sat down, we waited for an hour, and a man from the record company came, and he bought us both an ice cream.
They literally sent some. It says as much about the record company as about the artist, doesn't it?
Absolutely,
It's
yes.
extraordinary, the lengths they'll
We
go
had
to.
a cornet with a piece of chocolate on the top.
You remember
it to this
You
day.
remember it well.